In world history, we learned that industrialization was a transition from an agrarian system to capitalism, when work went from handmade and time-consuming to machine-manufactured and mass-produced. With the invention of factories, people once able to enjoy a life of their own self-rewarding work were suddenly forced into the life of monotonous labor. Country people gravitated to cities where large families were often crowded into tiny apartments. While this transition made many household items affordable for the average American, and also helped the few factory owners to become rich, many new problems arose. For instance, children were forced to work at young ages in jobs that were difficult and dangerous. Before labor unions, workers were forced to work long days with no regulations to protect employees from losing limbs or even lives. As masses of people suddenly found themselves forced to move into larger cities to find work, it was easy to be fired for the smallest of mistakes, and many specialists were gradually worked out as flashy new machines stole their crafts. As Greg Paulus, an investigative journalist for BBC and The Guardian, stated, "The purpose of industrialization is to make craft and skills obsolete and thereby make people interchangeable and cheap. This has taught me how in today's world, as capitalism continues to flourish, it is important to remember the impact of the industrialization of the 1800s and what we can learn from it for our workers today."
The Russian Revolution took place in 1917, towards the end of World War I. Unsatisfied with their Tsar's refusal to share political power and listen to Russian citizens, a group of revolutionaries led by Vladimir Lenin decided that fighting for legal reforms wouldn't create a large enough insurgence of change in the Russian government, and instead decided to erect a new party and completely trans Russia into a communist society. Their goals were to enforce an equitable distribution of resources, improve workers' rights by uniting peasants and workers, and limit the amount of power of monarchs so they couldn't overpower the voice and vote of citizens, who were the ones primarily affected by laws and legal reforms created by the government. This new communist society of the Soviet Union completely challenged the capitalist system of the US. Tensions between America and the Soviet Union increased further after World War II with Operation Paperclip, when the two groups fought to gain access to ex-Nazi scientists. In the US, these acquired scientists were sent to work for NASA, developing weapons and other technology, eventually lending their minds to rocket ships and other space exploration tech. In the Soviet Union, the same events were taking place, with the German scientists they had obtained. While tensions remained high between the US and Soviet Union as they feared what lay in store from the other territories' newly upgraded weapons bank, the space race began. In 1969, the US landed the Apollo 11 on the moon, winning the space race. According to the Air and Space Museum, after the end of the Apollo lunar missions, both the US and Soviet space programs envisioned a permanent human presence in space. Eventually, the Americans and the Soviets, and later the Russians, began to work with each other rather than against each other in space. This taught me how connected these historical events are. Rather than being singular anomalies in the course of history, each event has laid a groundwork for the ongoing relationships between nations and the state of our world.
One of the most well-known parts of history is the Holocaust. In class, we learned much of the backstory, starting with how at the end of World War I, the German economy was in ruins. Hitler took advantage of this by presenting himself as a solution to the problem. Hitler used the tactic of oppression to control the population, calling it Nazism. His most effective method? Fear. Fear of being murdered as an enemy of the people, fear of being sent to a concentration or work camp where you would likely die. Heinrich Himmler, one of the monsters of the Third Reich, said, "The best political weapon is the weapon of terror. Cruelty commands respect. Men may hate us, but we don't ask for their love, only for their fear." Many Aryan children were forced to join Hitler-Jugend to brainwash and control the young minds of Germany, with the ultimate goal of creating mindless, loyal soldiers. Because of this oppression, many groups secretly wanted to resist the rise of Nazism. One such group, called the Swing Kids, like myself, chose to resist by looking for a way to find joy in their lives away from the strict regime. Many Swing Kids were Hitler Youth by day and Swing by night. We learned that the Swing Kids became a simple and non-violent way to resist. There were countless other groups who resisted, ranging from Germans hiding Jewish citizens in their attics to the French resistance, in which they would create chaos for Nazis in the dead of night by stealing food supplies, blowing up parts of train tracks, or even bombing Nazi camps. This shows how even when there's oppression, there's resistance.
Metacognitive reflections help young people develop the skill of hindsight, which they might not otherwise gain until well into adulthood. It forces us to think about our mistakes as growth opportunities by making us remind ourselves that we learned from them. Metacognitive reflection also has a part in efficiency because we're forced to think critically about our failures and internally decode what changes need to be made in order to ensure progress, wasting as few resources as possible. They play off the phrase practice makes progress rather than practice makes perfect, which sets unrealistic, unattainable goals that will inevitably lead to disappointment.
This year, as a world history scholar and learner, an explorer, I have valued learning that nothing in history is a right or a wrong. But if you know the history, you can learn to know what you personally believe to be right or wrong. It is important for everyone to understand that recognizing these patterns throughout time can be a beneficial skill to help humanity stop repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
I've learned a lot about connection, both in terms of human connection with branching out of my comfort zone and making friends with people I wouldn't expect to get along with, but also historical connection, and the way that historical events kind of build on each other to shape society into what it is today. I've learned the skill of viewing my own mistakes and failures as building blocks, and giving myself some grace and leniency to really do things and live my life for what it is right now, rather than what it might become in the future.
The world as we know
it.
it.